Thank you for so speedily winding up those individual conversations, which are so valuable and important to an audience like you all. I'm pleased to be here to have the opportunity to introduce to you our keynote luncheon speaker, who has just come fresh from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where, Steve, we got early reports of great successes, and we're pleased and delighted to have you. It's a special pleasure for me because I've known Steve a long time. Steve's a graduate of Georgetown, has served as ambassador to Lithuania and to Poland, had several tours in Poland. He's now coordinator for implementation of the Iran agreement. And Steve, we're looking forward to having you tell us what that means and maybe what it doesn't mean. Steve was also, for a while, acting Assistant Secretary for Political Military Affairs in the State Department and Executive Secretary of the Department, a job I had some familiarity with. And essentially, it means making sure the Secretary of State does his job. So it's a very important job. Steve has also served elsewhere around the world, in addition to Europe and Indonesia, particularly, where he worked for Bob Gelbart, who is sitting here ready to mark your speech for the press. No, Bob is highly enthusiastic, Steve, as I was in terms of the opportunity I had to meet you out there. My sense is that Steve has perhaps one of the most demanding and potentially one of the most important jobs in government today, and certainly in the State Department. And Steve, we're delighted and pleased you're in the job. We're very, very much anxious to hear what you have to say. And obviously, with an audience of this distinction and with the degree of expertise and interest, you can expect maybe a few questions at the end, and I hope you'll be able to have time to take those on. But please warmly welcome with me Steve Mull, our keynote luncheon speaker today. Steve?
Thank you very much, Tom, and thanks to you and Frank Wisner and to Bill Lures and all the members of the Iran group who've been such a great source of support for this really important foreign policy challenge that we've been grappling with for many years. And also to the Atlantic Council, it's always great. I feel like I'm home when I'm here because having spent so much time in Central and Eastern Europe over the course of my career, the Atlantic Council has always been such a great source of support and partnership up until, while I was in Poland for the past 3 years. I really very much enjoyed working with Fred Kemp and his whole team in putting together the Wrocław Global Forum every year. So it's a real great pleasure to be here. And Tom, it's really nice to see you again. You probably don't remember this, but the very first time I met you, you came to South Africa when we had actually apartheid in our political section during the apartheid years, and I was in charge of the black political section, and you came to visit just after Walter Sisulu and some other people from South Africa from the ANC were released. You came in your capacity as UN ambassador, and it was amazing. We went straight from the airport to see Walter Sisulu. You said, okay, what are the top 5 things I need to say? I told them all. You said, And then we sat down with Mr. Sisulu, and you delivered those 5 points much better than I ever could have without any preparation at all. So I thought, when I grow up, that's somebody I want to be like. So thank you very much. I've been working in the Foreign Service for almost 34 years now. And shortly after Secretary Kerry and Wendy Sherman concluded the JCPOA last July, he asked me to come back from my last assignment in Poland to take charge of implementing the deal within the U.S. government. And so in that job, I'm leading a really excellent team of colleagues within the State Department, but as well as many other colleagues from throughout the government, from the Energy Department, from the Commerce Department, the Treasury Department, the intelligence community, the law enforcement community, to make sure that we do a perfect job in implementing this agreement. In fact, the first day that my job was announced, President Obama came over to the State Department to thank the negotiating team for doing such a great job in concluding this deal. And he pulled me aside. He said, Steve, you can't make a single mistake in this job, which I've never really quite started a job that way before. So I knew the pressure was going to go on. But he feels that way very strongly, as do I, because if we're successful in this deal, not only is it going to make us and our friends in the region a lot safer and a lot more secure, it opens up all sorts of new opportunities for our diplomacy that I hope we'll be able to exploit as we go forward. Now, I know that all of you, many of you in the audience, have been working on this issue for a very long time, and that you were instrumental in the very active public debate that took place about this deal, both during the negotiations and since we concluded them this summer. And we're very grateful, certainly within the State Department on behalf of Secretary Kerry, for all the attention you've paid to this issue and for the work that is still to come. We're going to keep counting on you to help us with this. The administration continues to engage Iran on a host of issues unrelated to this deal, including as part of the multilateral diplomatic effort on Syria, but also the continuing problems and the threat we face from Iran's support for terrorism, its human rights violations, its efforts to destabilize the region, its ballistic missile program, and the list goes on. But my job is strictly focused on the critical task of the JCPOA and making sure that it achieves its one crucial objective, and that's preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. When fully implemented, the JCPOA will dramatically scale back Iran's nuclear program and provide unprecedented monitoring and verification tools to ensure that it is exclusively peaceful as it moves forward. We're making good progress towards this objective already. October 18th marked Adoption Day under the JCPOA, when the deal formally came into effect, and all the participants began making the necessary arrangements for implementation of their JCPOA commitments. This included Iran's informing the International Atomic Energy Agency that it would provisionally apply the additional protocol and fully implement Modified Code 3.1, which provides for early declaration of nuclear facilities before they are built, starting on implementation day. These two mechanisms alone will ensure the international community has much greater insight into Iran's nuclear program than it's ever had before. The P5+1 and Iran also outlined the plan for redesigning the Arak heavy water research reactor so that it would not be able to produce weapons-grade plutonium, as it does now. And the United States and European Union took actions to be ready to lift nuclear-related sanctions when we reach implementation day, which is the next major milestone in the JCPOA. That day will occur only after the IAEA verifies that Iran has completed all of the nuclear steps outlined in the JCPOA. These are all the technical steps that push Iran's breakout time to at least a year from the current estimate of less than 90 days. At that time, Iran will receive, and only at that time, will Iran receive sanctions relief from the US, EU, and UN-related nuclear sanctions. The timing for reaching implementation day is primarily within Iran's control, and I'm sure you've seen Iranian officials speculate publicly about when they're going to be able to complete all these technical steps. But we really can't predict when it's going to occur. It's up to them to perform all of the tasks they committed to do, and it's up to the IAEA to verify that they have done so beyond a shadow of a doubt. Iran, though, has been working to fulfill its commitments and has made tangible progress on a number of them. For example, Iran has begun dismantling its uranium enrichment infrastructure by removing thousands of centrifuges and transferring them for storage under continuous IAEA surveillance. It has already removed more than 5,000 of them, of its over 19,000 machines, and it's likely to move quickly to remove the rest in the coming weeks. Iran is also making progress on reducing its stockpile of various forms of enriched uranium to no more than 300 kilograms of up to 3.67% enriched material, primarily by shipping a significant amount of such material outside of Iran, while diluting the remaining excess to the level of natural uranium or below. Commercial contracts are in place for Iran to ship its enriched uranium stockpiles to Russia, and we expect this material, about 25,000 pounds of materials enriched up to 20% low-enriched uranium, could leave Iran as soon as the end of this month. This step alone will dramatically lengthen Iran's breakout time. When it comes to the plutonium path, Iran must also remove and render inoperable the existing calandria, a new word for me, it means the core, of the Arak reactor by filling it with concrete before implementation day. These actions will effectively cut off Iran's ability to produce weapons-grade plutonium. Relatedly, Iran and the P5+1 are continuing our work to advance the redesign and reconstruction of that reactor, and the P5+1 has been working to set up a group to facilitate this project. That group will start working after the new year, and that group is to ensure that as the reactor is redesigned and modernized, it will not have the capability to produce weapons-grade plutonium. Regarding the possible military dimensions, or PMD, of Iran's past nuclear program, an issue I know all of you, as have we, been focused on, I'm sure you saw this week that the IAEA Board of Governors adopted by consensus a resolution addressing the Director General's recent report on PMD. This resolution, submitted by the P5+1, turns the board's focus from confirming what we already knew about Iran's past weapons-relevant nuclear activities toward fully implementing the JCPOA going forward, which, as I mentioned, will give the IAEA much better tools for deterring and detecting weapons-related activities in the future should they occur. The PMD report confirmed what we and the rest of the international community has long known, that Iran had a structured nuclear weapons program up until 2003, and that there are no indications of it continuing today. This candid assessment gives us further confidence that the IAEA will perform its duties related to the JCPOA vigorously. We also continue to work closely with the IAEA as it makes preparations to implement the JCPOA's unprecedented monitoring and verification provisions of Iran's entire nuclear program. The IAEA will have continuous monitoring of all of Iran's key declared nuclear facilities, including its uranium mills and its centrifuge production facilities, a first for the IAEA. These measures will give us increased confidence that Iran is not diverting material or equipment to a covert program. We've always said that this deal isn't based on trust, but on an intense verification of measurable, concrete facts on the ground in Iran. And that's why we're working so closely with the IAEA to make sure it has everything it needs to do this critical job going forward. Meanwhile, we're continuing to engage our international partners on other matters pertaining to implementation of the JCPOA. Given we believe very strongly that this agreement is in our and our partners' national security interest, we're talking to a number of other countries about progress on implementation and what's coming down the road. With that, I'm happy to stop talking for now and look forward to hearing your comments and taking your questions. And thanks again to everybody for coming here today and for all the work that you're doing on this issue. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Steve, very much. I want to take the opportunity as moderator just to ask one small question, the usual kind of question you ask everybody who's doing a tough job. What is your biggest problem in the weeks ahead as you see it?
The biggest problem in the weeks ahead, we are really at a crunch point. The Iranians in the past couple of weeks, Tom, have mentioned that they anticipate that they will be able to complete every step to which they've committed by the middle of January. I think President Rouhani most recently said he expects it to be completed at the latest by January 22nd. It's up to them to decide when they can do all of this, and the fact that they are doing it rather quickly than many expected, I think is we have a challenge to make sure that every step is verified perfectly. We have regular contacts with with the leadership and experts of the IAEA to make sure that they're going to be able to do that. But there's a lot of moving pieces that we'll have to stay on top of in the coming weeks. For example, as I mentioned, by the end of this month, we expect about 25,000 pounds of enriched uranium is going to be leaving Iran. We need to make sure that that gets out and is safeguarded appropriately. We need to make sure that the Iraq reactor is disabled, as Iran has promised to. We need to make sure that the IAEA has facilities at every one of Iran's nuclear spots from which they'll be able to work and to do their job. We need to make sure that the centrifuges are all removed, that were promised to be removed and placed into storage. So any one of these is a fairly easy thing to verify. Having it all happen at once is going to make sure, it's going to require a lot of attention, especially from the IAEA, but also from us in our oversight capacity.
From your talk with the Senate, do you have any sense that there is still a strong view that they should do all possible to undermine the agreement, remove it, get rid of it, force you not to, in fact, comply with your portion of the agreement?
I would say that the major theme of my time with the Senate this morning was their concern that not so much by what's happening in terms of the implementation process of this agreement, but more broadly when we look at things like Iran's most recent violation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1929 by conducting a ballistic missile launch back in October, that by not having swift reactions to that, by not having reactions to their continued detention of American citizens, by not having strong reactions to this is in their words, not mine, to the situation in Syria, that it's created an atmosphere of permissiveness. That we don't agree with that. There's a very strong sanctions regime. Iran is one of the most heavily sanctioned countries on earth. And all of the authorities, whether it's for terrorism or regional destabilization or ballistic missile activity, support for terrorism, all of these authorities are going to continue to be exercised.
The floor is now open for your questions. I have a hand way in the back. I can't see who you are. Stand up, please, on that side. Got it. Thank you. Would you please identify yourself and tell us what organization you may be affiliated with?
So it's Emily Meredith with Energy Intelligence. And my question is just, what would you say to somebody who says, look, the non-nuclear sanctions are so complicated that...
Would you hold the microphone a little
Sorry.
closer? Yeah.
Who says that the non-nuclear sanctions are so complicated that banks are going to be nervous, non-U.S. banks are going to be nervous about doing anything in Iran, and then that in turn is going to could compromise the JCPOA?
That's a very good question, and something that I know the Iranians are also very much concerned about as they look to benefit from sanctions relief as quickly as possible. That's why in the agreement that we negotiated, we agreed together with our European Union friends that we would issue guidance as clear as possible about what's allowed under the new circumstances and what's not going to be allowed under the new circumstances. So in the coming weeks, we're going to have dozens of pages of guidance that have been carefully coordinated with the Office of Foreign Asset Control at the Treasury Department, State Department lawyers, and so forth, to make absolutely clear what is allowed under the new circumstances and what won't be. And that will be a growing document. As businesses have questions, as I'm sure Adam Zubin, my colleague, mentioned to you earlier this morning, please, they should be in touch with OFAC to make sure that they understand exactly what they are permitted to do. As with any new arrangement, I think once we get a few weeks or months under our belt, that we'll be able to, it will become clearer, people will get a clear idea of what they're allowed to do. And I should stress that we're not looking to get in the way or block legitimate business activity that the sanctions relief will offer to mostly foreign, but in some cases, American companies as well.
Barbara Slavin, please.
Barbara Slavin from the Atlantic Council, and it's a pleasure to have you here. Feedback on this. There's some legislation that has been passed in the House that would interfere with the visa waiver authority for Europeans and others who would travel to Iran as well as Syria, Iraq, and so on. Has the administration taken a position on this yet, and are you concerned that this would be a violation of the JCPOA? Thank you.
I'm familiar with the legislation. I don't know if it's become part of the omnibus resolution that I assume that the White House is going to sign. The president will sign. I'm not aware that the White House has spoken on that particular provision, but already the prospect of the passage of that legislation has prompted some to express concern that it could be a violation of the JCPOA. I'm not sure we're ready to buy that argument necessarily, because the part of the JCPOA that critics of this legislation make reference to is that part of it in which all the parties agreed that they would not take actions intended to disrupt the economic activity that will be allowed to Iran after sanctions are relieved. So the intent of the modifications to the visa waiver program are clearly not to disrupt economic trade with Iran. It's about protecting our borders. And of course, people will debate, does it effectively protect our borders or not? But that's not the intent of this new legislation as it's been explained to me. I've just come from Poland. I mean, some of our best friends in the world, like Poland, don't take advantage of the visa waiver program. And so I wouldn't necessarily categorize whether one needs a visa to travel to the United States or not as something that's critical to foreign countries' economic interests or not. They just need to apply for a visa to be able to do what they do. But given the extremely strong support that this legislation seems to have in the Congress, it does seem that it will likely pass in the coming days. Although, interestingly, at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee this morning, senators from both sides were wondering aloud if perhaps they need to take another look at some of the intent of that. So it seems. The Senate has not put Iran on the list. That's right. The Senate has not yet. You're absolutely right. So this is still being. It's still being discussed, and the senators, again, from both sides of the aisle, seemed very interested in the issue about taking a closer look at it.
Frank Wisner.
Frank Wisner from the law firm of Squire Patton Boggs. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for a terrific presentation. All of us have followed your good work and the heated debate that preceded it. Part of it we recognize was the extreme concern of the state of Israel about the danger that Israel would be in as a result of an agreement with Iran on the behalf of the P5+1. A recent mission to Israel, including Tom Pickering and others, continued to emphasize the fact that the Israeli government regards Iran as a primary source of concern to Israel, her security, perhaps the greatest of any that the government currently identifies. Do you see that abating? How do we foresee dealing with Israeli concerns? How do we see managing those concerns so that they don't undercut the purposes and direction of our own diplomacy and our ability to carry out the terms of the JCPOA?
Thanks, Ambassador Wisner. I think we start from the assumption that regardless of the at times very heated, very emotional debate that characterized U.S.-Israeli relations on the question of this deal as it was being negotiated, despite all of that, we share a common strategic objective of limiting Iran's ability to weaponize its nuclear program in ways that could threaten the security of Israel as well as all of our friends. So there's no doubt that we share that strategic objective. Clearly, there have been differing opinions on what the right tactics are to meet that goal. But I have to say that since the JCPOA survived the congressional review process, and that's probably the right verb to use, that I think senior Israeli officials, and I've met with a number of them in the few months I've had this job, have said that, look, they wouldn't have gone this way with this deal, but they realize it's a fact of life. This deal is going forward. It's being implemented. And they've signaled to us at a very high level that they would like to work with us in making sure that the implementation is effective. So we've had numerous encounters. I know the White House has, the Defense Department has, and we at State have as well. In beginning that dialogue, I think it's going to be very active and very constructive, and it certainly has been so far.
Questions? Yeah, Dana.
Thank you. It's Dana Marshall with Transnational Strategy Group. Thank you, Tom and Ambassador Mull, for this. A lot of questions one could ask, but maybe I'll give you one that you might be able to answer more easily, and that's at the sub-federal level legislation. There are some forces on the anti-deal side that have already suggested that can be a route to sort of put these impediments that Tom was talking about. I wonder to what extent, maybe a couple of sub-questions on that, to what extent do you think the Iranians understand our federal system? Should, let's say, one state put in or implement very tough legislation, even implementing existing legislation, would they see that as a derogation from what we've said? And what about the ability or the desire of the federal government to work with the states to try to avoid that kind of a conflict?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question, and you may know that within the agreement itself, there is a provision that we would, in fact, keep our state and local authorities briefed in the United States on the implications of this agreement, explaining why we concluded this agreement and how it's going to work going forward. And so we're planning to do exactly that as we get into next year. We've been very clear. My colleagues who negotiated this deal were very clear throughout the process that we do have a federal system, and I think you'll see that. I think this drives our Iranian negotiating partners a little crazy sometimes, but sprinkled throughout the agreement, it's very clear that we will do these things consistent with our federal laws, consistent with U.S. government capabilities and authorities. And so we're not trying to hide that it is. America can be a pretty complex place to do business because of the special features of our federal system. And so I don't think the Iranian side is surprised by that. Obviously, they would like state and local authorities that have similar sanctions regimes to follow in the steps of what the federal government is planning to do with implementation day. But we will continue to explain to them when they don't understand why it may not be working that way.
Equal opportunity. I'll take a question on this side of the aisle, please. Please, right down here in front. They'll bring the microphone to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelsey Davenport with the Arms Control Association. Thank you so much for your remarks. We hear a lot about what Iran is doing on the nuclear side for the commitments it has to achieve before implementation day, but there's still the civil nuclear cooperation areas. Can you tell us if anything is happening, particularly in the nuclear security and safety areas, or if that's to happen after implementation day?
There are a number of governments who have contacted us to express. I don't want to name them because I don't want to commit them to anything. But there's a lot of interest among countries with a lot of expertise in nuclear power and nuclear safety issues, who are very eager. First of all, I'm sure they're sensing commercial opportunities, but secondly, just in terms of security, making sure that as Iran's civil nuclear program goes forward, it does so in a secure way. And I think there's a fairly broad and responsible international community willing to help on that. We've been cautioning that before implementation day, we're not really going to be in a position to support that. But once Iran arrives at implementation day, the agreement is very clear that not only are we not going to block, but in fact we're very supportive of efforts, and this is all the parties of the agreement, to promote cooperation on civil nuclear issues, especially on safety issues.
Just right down here.
Forgive me, I came in a bit late, so if you've touched on this, I apologize. But we heard this morning that you had said something in testimony about the question of whether the U.S. would pursue enforcement of UN Security Council resolution on missiles. This has become contentious. Could you tell us what is likely to happen with U.S. pursuit of enforcement on that issue?
No,
Trudy Rubin from the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Okay. No, thanks very much for that question, Trudy. There shouldn't be any doubt that the United States is strongly committed to enforcing all of the provisions of UN Security Council resolutions. And in fact, when we were able to confirm that Iran had launched a medium-range ballistic missile on October 10th, earlier this year. We were swift in having Ambassador Power stand up in the Security Council to say that, along with our partners from Germany, the UK, and France, to make clear that this seemed to us a clear violation of UN Security Council Resolution 1929. And that was referred to the panel of experts to make a determination. This week, they reported back through the Sanctions Committee to the Security Council that, in fact, it was a violation of that Security Council resolution, and Ambassador Power called for consequences for that violation. So we are working with the Security Council. Ambassador Power called on the Security Council to take action to exact penalties for those violations. We don't know if we will succeed in getting that through the Security Council, but in the meantime, we have substantial unilateral authorities to impose additional sanctions for violations of commitments and requirements on Iran's ballistic missile program. I'm not in a position to say what those consequences will be, but I can assure you that we're actively considering what those consequences will be.
Yes, back here, please.
Ali Dad Mafi Nezam, West Asia Council. Thank you, Ambassador Mull. My question has to do with the way you see the conclusion and the implementation of the JCPOA affecting the broader regional security dialogue, especially vis-a-vis Syria and the low to which Iran-Saudi relations have sunk. Thank you.
That's a little bit out of my lane. I assure you I'm busy enough on implementing this deal to say nothing of wading into the Syria problem. But I can say that we do look to engage with Iran in a multilateral way, with Saudi Arabia and others in the region. There's a meeting tomorrow. Secretary Kerry is going to be chairing a session of the Security Council on this issue. On the deal itself, I think it's no secret that, similar to Israel, there were other countries in the region who had concerns about would this deal there was an active debate about whether this deal would help make the region more secure. We were very gratified at the end of the debate that the GCC, for example, endorsed it as a positive step forward and agreed to be good partners of us in making sure that it's implemented. We also are very sensitive to their security needs, as we are to Israel's, and we view very much in our interest, as we go forward with this deal, that we continue to bolster the security, improve the ability of our friends to deter potential aggression from Iran through an expanded security assistance program that we're discussing with the GCC states as well as with Israel. So I wouldn't say that far from it, we're not in any kind of crisis with our friends in the region. I think we have a good dialogue with them, and so far they've been supportive.
Steve, maybe I could just intrude with one question, picking up on what Trudy had to say. I think we're all aware of the fact that within the JCPOA, there is a portion that says essentially that Iran has the right or reserves the right to withdraw if sanctions previously lifted are reimposed. I think that's not an exact phraseology, but it's close enough. Mm-hmm. We now face 1929. A statement in the UN experts that this is a violation, a sense on the part of the U.S. just conveyed by you that there should be consequences for that. If we were to move, as we might, in denominating specific individuals in the missile program responsible for the test or related to the test, would this be seen on the Iranian side as the reimposition of sanctions, particularly if some of these individuals had already been sanctioned and released by the JCPOA? And would that be, in the view of the United States, justified? Or are we going to avoid, hopefully, the kind of, put it this way, inadvertent collision that might result in a sanctioning to take place, in our view, quite legitimately, but interpretable on their side with some plausibility as being the old sanctions back in new clothing?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I learned very early on in my career is to avoid answering hypothetical questions. So I'm going to try and heed that advice that somebody,
do your best.
somebody gave me. But I think we've been very clear about this, certainly through the negotiation process as well as publicly, that this deal and the sanctions relief that will flow from it is specifically focused on the nuclear program and nothing else. And nothing about this deal, nothing about the granting of sanctions relief on the nuclear sanctions implied any softening of any other intent to apply other sanctions authorities when warranted, whether it's through missile launches or human rights violations or acts of terrorism, the whole list of things for which we have sanctions authorities on Iran. There have been voices in Iran that have said that this deal means no new sanctions may be applied, which is a complete misinterpretation of what we've been very clear about throughout this process. Ultimately, we believe that this deal, in granting relief from the sanctions that Iran will benefit from when it gets to implementation day, should be providing ample incentive, regardless of what happens in these other tracks, to go forward with Iran's full implementation. But obviously, we have our job to do in terms of protecting their interests, and they have theirs to do, and they'll have to make that determination. We want the deal to succeed, though. Make no mistake about that.
And that's an important point. Thank you. Back here in the middle, is it Nelson? Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Ambassador. Nelson Cunningham, McClarty Associates. One of the great ironies, of course, is that even though the U.S. led the way toward this deal, the sanctions relief, when it comes, will benefit American businesses almost not at all compared to European businesses, Chinese, Turkish, Indian, any other part of the world. How do you see that influencing the next phases of this? Do you see political pressure being applied on one way or the other to change the congressionally mandated sanctions regime that are not touched by this agreement?
The short answer is I think it's too early to tell, and that's not a cop-out. It really is too early to tell. I think in response to an earlier question, I was mentioning that as we get farther along the road of this agreement, particularly beyond implementation day, let's say a year afterward, we're going to have a pretty clear idea. Is this working? Is Iran implementing its part of the bargain in a good faith way? Are we doing what we promised to do in terms of relieving the sanctions? And it's a gamble. Who knows how this is going to turn out? But if it goes well, it could create more good faith on both sides, I think. What political result that good faith can contribute to, I can't say. We're coming into what looks like it's going to be a very contentious election year here in the United States. As Senator Menendez reminded me this morning, the Iran Sanctions Act, one of the many pieces of sanctions authority that the U.S. government has, is coming up for renewal at the end of 2016. Supporters of that agreement have indicated that they would like to move sooner rather than later to renew that. I'm sure when the Congress is called to decide that question, they will look at, is this going to help implementation or will it hurt it, and decide accordingly. So I don't know. Ask me 6 months from now. I could probably give you a clearer answer.
Please. Trita, thanks.
Ambassador, thank you so much, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for putting on this excellent program. I want to go back to a question that Barbara raised regarding the visa waiver program. As I think you also testified this morning, Europeans have a rather different interpretation. The critics of this includes the European governments who have a rather categorical view that this is a violation of the deal. Now, mindful of the fact that this language was put in last minute into this bill, mindful of the fact that the intent is to offset any attempt by ISIS to be able to reach the United States, which then makes it rather curious that Iran is included in this, but Saudi Arabia and Pakistan is not. How confident can we be that the intent of this, as you mentioned, is not to derail normal trade relations? Not to derail normal trade relations with Iran. Thank you.
Well, really the definitive answer to that question will be provided by the people who drafted the legislation and who are piloting it through the Congress. But as I read about it in the press and talk to members of Congress who've been behind this, I've not detected that that closing off access to Iran is a motive that they are applying for their, rightly or wrongly, if this legislation is the right way forward. I'm not in a position to say that, but they're claiming that that's not part of their motive. Iran isn't even really mentioned. I mean, it's really as a state sponsor of terrorism. It's through that that Iran has found itself in the crosshairs. Well, it's not even in the crosshairs. It's just because it's designated as a state sponsor of terrorism that it's included in the scope of the legislation. One way to escape, if there's a country that wants to get out of this restriction, is don't be a state sponsor of terrorism, and that's certainly one easy way to fix it. But you're right, Trita. It's not just the Iranians who are complaining about this legislation. Our European partners are as well.
Way in the back, please.
Edward Levine, Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation. You know, as a former staffer of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I think we trained you for this job, Ambassador, by giving you such a hard time on arms sales. So you should have no trouble with this. I want to ask a two-pronged technical question. There are several parts of the JCPOA in which the detailed modalities are not spelled out, and presumably those have to be arranged by implementation day. And I wonder how that is going and how well the United States government can keep track of this in a situation in which going forward there will not be American inspectors involved in the process. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed. It's great to see you again. I remember very well our meetings together back when I worked in PM. Yeah, there were a couple of pieces of unfinished business when the deal was completed back in July. One of them, for example, is that there needs to be an agreement about as Iran gets into the out years of the agreement, what it will be allowed in terms of developing centrifuges. What do those centrifuges look like? What will their outputs be? And so we've been very intensely consulting at experts level. In fact, a sizable number of my colleagues are in Vienna today for another round of discussions on this. And I think we're very, very close to agreement on closing that particular gap. So we should have that in place. And then there's the sanctions guidance. It wasn't written yet at the time of the conclusion of the deal, but that will be finished in the next couple of weeks as well. We also need to, Iran committed to reduce its enriched uranium stockpile to below 300 kilograms. We anticipate that in the coming weeks it will cross that threshold. They're definitely picking up speed on this, but not all of the details have been sorted out yet. I have every confidence they will be. We've been working very hard with the IAEA and our other partners in the P5+1 to do it, and that will be resolved. In terms of having confidence in the IAEA's results, you're right. We're not going to be sending American inspectors to Iran anytime soon. But we've had such a long and rich history of technical cooperation and training and providing equipment to the IAEA. It's really one of the things that's impressed me most of all since I started on this job in September is how closely we work with the IAEA and a truly professional and group of people with very high standards. We have full confidence they're up to this job.
Steve, will you take one more?
Sure.
This is the last question, if there is one out there. Yes, right over here, please.
Thank you very much. Cornelius Adebar with the Carnegie Endowment. I will go for the easy questions. It's not hypothetical, but it is about the future. As the head of the Iran task force, when do you believe to be taking a trip to Iran for the first time?
I'm sorry. When will I
You
go
see,
to Iran?
it's so easy. When do you think you will be taking a trip to Iran?
Well, I'd love to go to Iran someday, but I don't think that'll be happening by Christmas. Thanks very much.
Steve, let me thank you very much for both a great talk, setting the stage so beautifully, and for your long and patient perseverance with the questions. It comes at the end of a day, and I've been there with you in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in one of those endless hearings where they never seem to be able to find the end. And then having to come up here and do double duty is well beyond the cause of both human rights and government service. So let me thank you most sincerely in behalf of all of us, the Iran Project, the Atlantic Council, the sponsors. It's a delight to have you. Let me also say, we've always known you've been a quick study, and you are a brilliant quick study. You've been in this job a comparatively short time. Your mastery of the subject, your ability to discern and present the material in a way that is clearly persuasive and well understood is in many respects a perfect ratification of the Secretary's decision to choose you for this job. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.